So welcome to our General Skilled Migration Masterclass webinar. We have been receiving lots of requests for this topic, so we decided to do what we call the definitive presentation on General Skilled Migration Visas. So what are we going to see today? We're going to look into GSM, General Skilled Migration Visas. I like to start from the basic. What is a visa? So if you're here in Australia, you have a visa. But if you're watching us and you're not in Australia yet, you may never have had a visa to Australia. A visa to Australia is nothing more than a document that allows you to travel to Australia, or if you are here already, to continue to stay here. There are three types of visas: a temporary visa that will have a date to end. So visitor visa, a student visa, graduate visa, working holiday visa. These visas are all temporaries. They have a date saying you must not stay in Australia from date blah. A permanent visa, on the other hand, is a visa that allows you to come to Australia and stay here forever, permanently, indefinitely. And we have a third type of visa, which is a bridging visa. Bridging visas are visas that you are granted by the Department of Home Affairs if you make a valid application for a visa while you're in Australia. So you might come here as a student and then decide to apply for a graduate visa. When you apply for that graduate visa and you're in Australia, the government automatically grants you a bridging visa so you can stay here while they're processing your visa application for the graduate visa, because processing times are long, so you don't necessarily get that visa before your current visa expires. So to keep you legally in Australia while that processing is taking place, you are granted a bridging visa. So these are the only three types of visas that exist in terms of length and what they are. Now, so when it comes to permanent or temporary visas, we have different visa programs. So we have the student visa program, for example. We have the family visa program, where the partner visa belongs, child visa, parent visa, and so on. But when we're talking about migrants who are coming to Australia because of their professional attributes, because of their occupation, their work experience, their previous studies, that falls under the umbrella of what is called the Skilled Migration Program. Now, the Skilled Migration Program itself is divided into programs. We have the General Skilled Migration Visas, and we have the Employer-Sponsored Program. Now, the Employer-Sponsored Program, as the name says, is a program where someone applying for a visa needs a job offer from an Australian employer. So we have two temporary visas and we have one permanent visa as part of this program. We have Subclass 482 TSS sponsorship visa, Subclass 494 regional sponsorship visa. They're both temporary. And we have one permanent employer visa, which is Subclass 186. Now, we're not going to be covering these visas today. That we have another webinar, another topic for employer-sponsored visas, but it's important to see the distinction between general skilled migration visas, or what we call GSM, and employer-sponsored visas. So the employer-sponsored visas, clients first need to find a job offer in Australia from an Australian company and then proceed to apply for one of these visas. And we get a lot of emails and inquiries from clients saying, I want to go to Australia on a work visa. And we have to explain to them, there is no such thing as a work visa in Australia. We have working holiday visas for some countries where people can come for a year and have a holiday and work, and then they don't have to have a prior job offer to that. But then we have the employer-sponsored visas that require a job offer. So there is no visa for you to come to Australia with work permission, and when you come here, you decide, what you want to do. If that's what you're looking at, then you should be looking at the GSM visas. However, a GSM visa is either a permanent visa, there's 2 permanent subclasses, and there's a temporary 5-year subclass. And they're not visas just for you to come over and check out the job market and see if there's a job for you here. These visas are expensive. They require a lot of documentation. They require you to have advanced levels of English, to sit for an English exam in the majority of cases, to do what is called a skills assessment, which is a registration or a validation, as some people call, of your occupation, your profession in Australia. So this all takes time, takes investment of money, and it's not for people who don't want to spend at least 5 to 10 years here, because it's a lot of effort and investment to get this visa. So when we get inquiries from clients saying, I want to go to Australia to work, we say, great, do you have a job offer? And they're like, no, I just want to get a visa so I can go there and start working. That visa doesn't exist, unfortunately. But we are here today to talk about the GSM visas, the General Skilled Migration Visas. And there are 3 of them, as I said. We have 2 permanent subclasses, subclass 189 and 190. And we have a 5-year temporary visa, which is technically called provisional. And it's a regional visa, subclass 491. Now, these 3 visas have 2 things in common. They are managed under Skill Select, which is a database from the Department of Immigration that they utilize to select candidates, literally. And all these 3 visas are what we call points-tested visas. They are visas that require the applicant to score a minimum in a points test. Now, another question we have when people are starting their journey in finding about migration to Australia, a question we get is, so it's a test. Do I need to go and sit somewhere and take a test and write things? No, it's not a test, it's not an exam. The government gives you points for certain attributes. We're going to have a look at the test today in detail. So what is a Skill Select and how this database, this online system that the Department of Immigration utilizes, how does it work? This system was implemented in 2012, and it really works as a obstacle, or what I call a gate. Before 2012, me and my team, we would have a consultation with you. We would identify if you qualified for a visa or not. And then we would say, great, we believe you qualify. Let's work on a visa application for you. And we would prepare your documentation and simply lodge that visa application with the government. Once we lodged it and you paid the lodgement fee and all the documents were there, if you met the requirements, and we only take cases on board when you do meet the requirement, then the Department of Home Affairs, under law, had to grant you that visa. So what happened over the years? This program started in the mid-90s. What happened over the years was that the Department of Home Affairs started getting way more applications than they had visa places to grant per year. Problem number 1. Problem number 2 was that they had no control in terms of who was applying. So we've always had occupation lists that list the professions that are in more demand here in Australia. But not all professions and occupations are in this same level of demand. So for example, if you look at the skilled list at the moment, all the medical professions are there, and we've always had medical professions in all the demand lists because it's not an occupation that is common. But we also have accountants in the skills shortage list, and it's accountants always being there. Now, the government needs way more doctors than they need accountants. We need both professionals, but we need doctors more than accountants. So before Skill Select, because it's a more common occupation than being a doctor, we were receiving hundreds of thousands of applications from accountants and not so many from doctors. And because the accountants made a valid application, and under law, we had to give them visas. So we ended up getting a couple of occupations and not others. So with Skill Select, there's an extra step. We cannot simply prepare your application and lodge it with the department. We need to wait until the department selects you, chooses you, and invites you to apply for a visa. And how do they choose people? It's based on a number of things, and we're going to look at that. It's based at how many places for each visa are available in a year, how many places per occupation. So now they decide, okay, we're going to have 50,000 places for doctors and 5,000 places for accountants. So now the government, well, not now, since 2012, the government is in control of this system, and they decide who can apply for visas and when. Now, depending on which one of those three general skilled migration visas you are wanting to apply, your invitation will work in a different way. But this was a big change in 2012, and now the department is more in control. So it's great for the country and great for the Department of Immigration. Now, is it good for you? That's another question, because the problem we have, and we have had for a while, is that you are not in control of when or if you'll be invited. So when we look at subclass 189, which is the permanent skilled independent visa, your invitation will come out, if it comes out, depending on the number of places for that financial year, depending on the number of places for your profession, your occupation, when the government's going to do invitation rounds. And it's all electronic, it's all a software. There's no human making a decision there. But also depending on your ranking of your points test score compared to other people who are in the system waiting for an invitation as well. So, and the problem is we don't have access to information in terms of how many people from your occupation are waiting for how long and what are their scores. So it's really a question mark. When we talk about subclass 190, which is also a permanent visa, but it's state nominated, then you will be invited when you have an approval for an application for state nomination. So the state nomination triggers the invitation within Skill Select. Same with the visa 491. But then these states and territories have their own selection process. And with time, it turns into mini Skill Select systems within the states. So then we also don't know, in the majority of cases with the states and territories, when they will select you or if they will select you. So recent news in Australia have been very optimistic and positive in the sense that the current government, we have a new government in power since May. The current government has increased the places in the annual migration planning levels. However, it's not enough to invite everyone who's waiting. So obviously, some people will not get invited. By having more places in the annual planning levels, the states and territories also got more places, but still, it's not enough places for everyone that expresses interest to be selected. So we have a disconnection, which is there's always going to be more people applying than there'll be places available. So you have no control of if you will be invited or when you will be invited when it comes to a GSM visa. So here at Bravo, we continue to believe that employer visas are a better option for you. Now, if you are not in Australia, it's not impossible, but it's not easy to obtain a job offer and be able to apply for one of the employer-sponsored visas. If you are here already on a temporary visa, if you're here on a student visa, on a working holiday visa, on a graduate visa, then your chances of getting an offer and applying for one of these visas are much higher. And here, you don't need to be selected by the government. You don't need to be chosen by a state or territory. It's all about your ability to find a job offer in your occupation. Going back to Skill Select and GSM visas, let's look at all the GSM visas one by one. The best one of them is Subclass 189. Why? Because it's a permanent visa. It allows you to live and work anywhere in Australia once it's granted. It comes with full work rights. You have access to Medicare and other benefits. And there's no strings attached. However, it is the hardest visa to get. Why? Because there's an occupation list where you should look and choose your occupations from. And that list is called Medium and Long-Term Skills Shortage List, or the MLT-SSL. There's not many occupations there, but there are still a good number. Now, this is the visa where you will only be invited by Skill Select if you rank high enough. As I said, what is this ranking thing? It's an equation that takes into consideration how many places for that visa are available, how many places for your occupation, and the ranking of other people who are also sitting in Skill Select waiting to be invited. So it's a question mark. You don't know if you're going to be invited. Now, since the new government started, there's been an invitation round. People were invited in late August, so we can see that it's going to move, but still there's not that many places for this visa. The government's giving more places to employer-sponsored visas, or the next GSM subclasses we're going to look at, subclass 190 and 491, where there's a state or a territory involved. So the steps to applying for a 189 visa are the same as the steps we're going to see for subclass 190 and 491. First and foremost, you need to identify if your occupation is in the adequate list for this visa. So with 189, we're talking about the MLT-SSL. Once you identify if your occupation is in that list, you need to obtain a skills assessment, which is a professional recognition in Australia of your occupation. Every occupation has different requirements because there's different professional bodies. So if you're an engineer, you need to obtain a skills assessment with an organization called Engineers Australia. If you are an IT professional, you need to talk to the Australian Computer Society. If you're a doctor, you need to get registered with the Australian Medical Board, and so on. So different professions, different requirements, but everyone wanting to express interest in being invited needs to score at least 65 on a points test. We're going to have a look at the points test. Now, once you obtain your skills assessment and you're certain that you can score 65 points, you need to submit what it's called an expression of interest, which is an application within Skill Select. This is not a visa application. It's an application where you say, hi, this is me. I would like to be considered by Skill Select to be invited to apply for a visa. And you are only going to be invited if you rank high enough and if the equation works. And the equation, once again, is the number of places for the 189 visa for the current financial year, the number of places for your occupation, and the ranking of other people in the same occupation with you. Now, all 3 GSM visas are only for candidates who are aged 44 or low. The day you turn 45, you might be waiting for an invitation. You may have submitted an expression of interest with Skill Select. You're waiting, nothing happens. If you turn 45, you get kicked out of the system immediately, unfortunately. There are no exceptions. There are some exceptions when you are looking at the employer-sponsored visas, but not with any general skilled migration visas, unfortunately. Subclass 190 is very similar to subclass 189, but once it is approved, you can't just come to Australia and live anywhere. You're going to have to live in the state that nominated you for the first 2 years. And that means anywhere in that state. So if you're being nominated by the state of Victoria, you can live anywhere in Victoria, including Melbourne, the capital. If you're being nominated by New South Wales, you can live anywhere in the state, including Sydney. So that's the difference between this visa and subclass 189 once the visa is granted. The process in applying for this visa and the requirements are also different. Both visas are permanent, but for this visa, we have a bigger option of occupations to choose from. There are actually 2 lists that we can look at. The MLT SSL, which is the medium and long-term skills shortage list, and also the short-term skills occupation list, where there's a lot more occupations to choose from. So that makes this visa more viable to a number of people who might not be able to apply for subclass 189. So remember, 189, we only have 1 list of occupations, MLT SSL. With 190, we have MLT SSL and the short-term STSOL list. Not only, and again, we receive a lot of inquiries from clients saying, I saw that my occupation is on the short-term list, so I want to hire you guys to apply for a 190 visa. And we say, great that you found your occupation on the short-term list, but that's just the first step. The next step is to see if there's any states or territories in Australia who also want people from your field. Each state and territory has their own list and their requirements. They vary from state to state. So there's 2 levels of applications. We need to apply first with the state and territory and then go ahead with a visa. But the system is the same. I need to prepare a skills assessment for you, get you recognized in your career with your professional body here. You need to score at least 65 on a points test. Then we submit an expression of interest. Then, in many cases, there's an expression of interest or a registration of interest that we need to lodge with your chosen state. In other cases, we have to wait for the state to select you. And we sit and we wait. Once a state approves your nomination, then Skill Select will invite you. And then, and only then, I can apply for subclass 190. So this is where we are coming from when we say that even though things are looking more positive for GSM visas, for general skilled migration points tested visas, applying for an employer migration visa, it's much better because you don't need to wait to be selected. And unfortunately, as I'm saying, not everyone will be selected. Whereas if you come to Australia and you find a job in your field, there's no selection process. Your employer has to apply with you, be part of that application, but there's no skill select step that you need to sit and wait. So you're more in control of that application. And again, this visa is only for people who are aged under 45. Then we have the regional temporary visa subclass 491 with even more options for occupations. So the government really wants to encourage people to move to regional areas. Now, a regional area at the moment is the whole country except Sydney, Brisbane and Melbourne metropolitan areas. We have the rest. It's a very large country. If you're not here in Australia, you should know. And for the purposes of immigration and these visas, the whole country, except those 3 cities, is considered a regional area. So when we say it's a regional visa, it doesn't mean you're going to have to live in the desert, in the outback by yourself. There's cities of considerable sizes that are considered regional areas. And why is this so? Because the government wants to encourage people to choose other cities. Sydney, Brisbane, and Melbourne are normally the first choice of many people, but we want to send people also to Perth, to Adelaide, to the Gold Coast, to the Sunshine Coast, to Canberra, Newcastle, Wollongong, Tasmania, and so on. So there are visas specific to, this is a visa that is specific to people who are going to live in these areas. In many cases, and again, we're going to need a state and territory nomination anyway, your occupation needs to be one of the 3 lists I'm showing here and in a list that belongs to a state or territory where you want to live. They're going to have their own requirements and their own occupation lists, but in a lot of cases, the requirements mean you should already be living and working in that state. If you're in Australia, now there's pathways for people who are not in Australia either. After having had the borders closed for almost 2 years during COVID, the majority, 99% of the states and territories have opened for offshore candidates, but they will prioritize people who are already living in that state or territory, either with a student visa and studying or working in their professions there with a student visa, graduate visa, sponsorship, temporary visa. You will see we're going to run through the requirements today. It's not impossible for someone from who is in another country to be invited by a state. We just had a teacher, primary teacher who was working in Japan, be selected by the state of New South Wales, but they will prioritize people who are already here. This is not a permanent visa. It's a visa that's granted for 5 years. And after 3 years living and working in regional areas, the visa holder can apply for a permanent visa. Same steps as the other 2 visas, skills assessment, 65 points on the points test. Then we lodge an expression of interest. Then we do what we have to do to get you nominated by a state. And then and only then we can apply for this visa. After 3 years, we're going to have to show evidence that you stayed only in these areas of Australia or even more remote areas. And then you'll be able to apply for a permanent visa. In each one of those years where you held the subclass 491 visa, you need to be earning a minimum income of almost $54,000 a year. The good thing is, doesn't matter how old you are when you get to those 3 years, doesn't matter what occupation you have, and there will be no more points test. Literally, you just need to live and work here for 3 years outside of Sydney, Brisbane, and Melbourne, and you can apply for this visa. This visa is only open for applications November this year because this visa was implemented in November 2019. Now, I keep talking about the current government and the numbers of places, how many places per year, how many places per occupation, and what is all this talk? We have something called the annual migration planning levels. So every year, the government announces how many permanent visas will be approved in that financial year. So we are currently in the financial year 22-23, from 1st of July to the 30th of June next year. We have 30,000 places for employer-sponsored permanent visas. There's no limits for temporary visas. Sponsorship visas can be granted as necessary. Skilled independent is the 189 visa. As I said, we only have 16,000 plus places. But as you can see, this is all an increase from last financial year because During the pandemic, these numbers went blue, and they were going down as well before the pandemic. The previous government didn't want to increase this. Now there's such a shortage of workers that this government has, the previous government actually has bumped these numbers up, and the current government has already announced an increase in another 39,000 places, 35,000 places. Here it is. We had a summit conference in September where the prime minister was trying to address the shortage of people to work in skilled positions in Australia. And one of the announcements that he made was that the number of places in the skilled migration program was increased in up to 35,000. So these numbers are not even correct. There's going to be more. There's another 35,000 places here. But I need to show you what's in the department's website, and they have not updated this yet, but this has been announced. There's been also an increase in regional visas, 9,000 for the 491 and 20,000 for the 190. So this is huge. It's great, but again, there are more people wanting to apply than there are places. So you are not going to be in control of your application. The latest statistic I have to give to you is from an invitation round from Skill Select in April. As I said, there was one in August, and we saw lots of people being invited. It surely will be more than 1,000. What we also saw was that the minimum score for those people went down from 85 to 65. So that, again, is all very positive. But if you're not in Australia, you will not be prioritized, and that's the situation. Now, this is the points test, and I keep talking about your need to score 65 on the points test. What is the points test? This is the points test. You need to claim points for anything from your age to how many years of experience, your levels of English, and so on. And you need to score a minimum total of 65 points. So this is the calculator sheet we use when we're in consultation with our clients. We ask them their age, what type of qualification they have, how many years of work experience in their country they have, how many years of work experience in Australia if they are here already, and if they have work permission, and if they are working in their occupation. We have a lot of international students who move to Australia and start working in something completely different. We can't claim points for that, but when they are working in their occupation, yes, we can. After you spend 2 years studying in Australia, depending on what you studied, you can claim points for the Australian study requirements. If those studies were in a regional area, so remember, not Sydney, not Brisbane, not Melbourne, you can claim another 5 points. If you're undertaking a master's by research or a doctorate in a science, technology, engineering, or maths occupation, you can get another 10 points. If you have a spouse who can give you points because they're also skilled, then you can get from 5 to 10 points. If you are single and you don't have a spouse, you can also get 10 points, so you're not in disadvantage. If you can speak a second language, which many of you would, and you sit for an accredited translator test with an organization called NATI, you could get another 5 points. And if you completed your bachelor degree studies here, and then you signed up for a professional year, which is a mixture of an internship and a course that you buy, so there's a price for it. You spent 1 year doing some extra studies and working as an intern, then you can get 5 points as well. Now, if you're applying for the 189 visa, you are not getting state or territory points. But if you're applying for a 190 or a 491 visa, you get extra points for that state or territory nomination as well. So the 190 visa, you get 5 points. The 491 visa, you get 15 points. As I say to all my clients, unless you're from the UK, from the US, from Canada, from Ireland or New Zealand, there is no escape sitting an English test. If you are from the UK, the US, Canada, New Zealand, or Ireland, you don't need to sit for a test to apply for the visa. But if you're wanting to claim points, you also will have to sit for an English test, because having what we call competent English gives you 0 points in the points test. What is competent English? It's being a citizen of an English-speaking country, and that unfortunately doesn't include South Africa, because legally it's not the official language of South Africa. My South African clients are never happy with this situation, having to do an English test, but unfortunately, in a lot of cases, in all cases, they have to do it. So you're either from one of those countries, or you need to sit for an exam, such as the IELTS exam, and score at least 6 in each component of that exam. So this is the minimum to be able to apply for any of these 3 general skilled migration visas. Now, there's other exams you can take. You can take the PTE academic, you can sit for the Cambridge Advanced TOEFL, or the Occupational English Test, OET. But they all have equivalent scores that would give you also 0 points if you're at that level of English, which is called competent English. And that's the minimum. If you need to claim more points so you can score 65, or if you want to score higher than 65 because you want to be invited faster, or you want to increase your chances of being invited, then you're going to have to sit for an exam and score even higher. There's something we call proficient English, which is a score of IELTS of 7 in each component of the IELTS exam. And these include English speakers, native English speakers as well. If they want more points, they're going to have to sit for this exam or an equivalent exam. And then there's superior English, which is a score of 8 in each component of the IELTS. Only if you score at least 65, and again, please don't try to calculate this yourself, because there are nuances to making these calculations that you really need a registered professional to calculate for you, especially when it comes to work experience. It's not simple. You can't count all your work experience in your life. There's stages, certain periods of time. With your spouse as well is not straightforward. So please get in touch with us, and we'll be happy to calculate your points as part of our Visa Action Plan consultation. Now, remember, we have 3 general skilled migration visas. We have 189, which is independent, doesn't involve nomination from a state or territory. And once the visa is granted, you can move to Australia, or you can stay in Australia and live anywhere in the country. But the other 2 visas, Subclass 190, permanent, and Subclass 491, temporary, require a nomination from a state or a territory. What are the states and territories seeking right now? And this is a great time for you to be watching this webinar, because finally, all states and territories have published their requirements and their occupation lists. Now, the Northern Territory is not open for applicants who are not in Australia. So remember when I said 99% of the states are open for candidates outside of Australia? This is the 1%. The Northern Territory is not accepting applications from anyone who is not either working in the territory for at least 6 months or 2 years, depending on the visa, and people who finished studying 2 years there. Now, they don't have a specific occupation list. They have the whole instrument. So the MLT, SSL, the STSOL, and the regional occupation list. If you have an occupation in one of those lists, the territory will consider your application, but only if you're working or graduating from the territory. Now, New South Wales has published a list. It's on their website. All you need to do is Google New South Wales Skilled Work Regional List. For the 491 visa, there's some occupations. For the 190 visa, there's other occupations. But for both cases, New South Wales is only going to nominate people who are either living in New South Wales. So if you are in Australia and you want to be nominated by New South Wales, you need to be living in New South Wales. Or they will also consider people who are outside of Australia. Now, if you're looking at the temporary visa 491, you should be living in New South Wales consecutively for the last 3 months. If you are outside of Australia, you should be outside of Australia for the last 3 months as well. If you're thinking about the permanent visa 190, there's another occupation list, but they also only will nominate you if you have been living outside of Australia or in New South Wales. But for this visa, they're looking at 6 months instead of 3. Now, these occupation lists are very important because not only they list which occupation New South Wales is seeking, but it also explains the minimum work of experience required and what's the minimum points to score. So New South Wales being very popular, a lot of people express interest to be nominated by New South Wales. So there's more people applying than there are places that were given to New South Wales. So New South Wales had to restrict every year. It gets harder and harder to meet the criteria. So what they did now is they said, okay, we need restaurant managers, but we received so many expressions of interest from restaurant managers that we're only going to look at restaurant managers who have a minimum of 2 years work experience as restaurant managers and who can score at least 85 in the points test, not the 65 points that the department requires. So they're putting stricter requirements than the Department of Immigration themselves. So they say, we're only going to nominate you if you have this occupation, this many years of work experience, and this score in the points test. So the New South Wales skills list, if you Google that, is going to give you all the occupations, all the minimum years of experience, and the minimum points. Tasmania is a very popular state with migrants as well because their requirements are not so strict. They can nominate any occupation in any of those 3 lists that I mentioned before. So that's advantage number 1. They also consider people who are in or outside of Australia, but they will not let you apply directly. And that's the case with New South Wales as well. We can't just prepare a state nomination application and send it to them. So if I myself or one of our agents in our team have a consultation with you and say, you meet all the requirements for New South Wales or for Tasmania, we can't just prepare your application and lodge it with that state. We're going to have to submit your expression of interest, tick a box saying we want New South Wales to consider you or we want Tasmania to consider you, and then we have to wait for them to see your expression of interest so they can actually go into skill select. And then when they're looking at skill select, they will choose you and then we can apply for state nomination. So that's the system with New South Wales and Tasmania. With the Northern Territory, we can make what it's called direct applications. New South Wales and Tasmania, we have to wait for them to choose you. So remember what I was saying? We already have the gatekeepers at skill select. Now the states and territories are also creating gatekeeping measures. So yes, there's more places. Yes, everything's looking positive. This government's already making changes, but because of this waiting and not knowing if you will be invited, it's always a better option to get an employer visa, not a GSM visa, unless really you can't find work here at all. So yeah. Now, Tasmania offers a couple of pathways. They nominate people who are studying in Tasmania, excuse me, for a minimum of 1 or 2 years, depending on the visa. They nominate people who are working part-time or full-time in Tasmania. They nominate people who have been living there for 2 or 3 years and working part-time, and people who open or buy a business in Tasmania. There's also a pathway for people who are not in Tasmania, who are not in Australia. So if you are in Australia, you either have to be studying, working, or have bought a business or started a business in Tasmania for them to consider you. If you are in Australia, but you're not in Tasmania, you will not be considered. However, if you are not in Australia, you can be considered, but only if you have a job offer to work in Tasmania. But some generous provisions there. Now, Western Australia has a particular list. You need to Google WA skilled migration list. There's 3 parts to that list. There's what is called Schedule 1, which is for health occupations, so doctors, nurses, physiotherapists, etc. Schedule 2, which is for all the other more common occupations, and graduate occupation list, which is a list for people who have completed their studies in WA. Normally, all 3 streams require you, again, to be in WA and have a job offer in WA. They are open now for people outside of Australia, but they also have to have a work job offer in WA if they're not in Australia. Now, what WA just did recently is they have lifted temporarily the requirement that people need to have a job offer. So they really want people applying and staying in WA. So if you're in WA and your occupation is in one of those 3 lists for a temporary period of time, we don't know how long, you won't need to have a job offer in WA to be invited. Again, we cannot apply directly with Western Australia. We need to lodge an expression of interest, select Western Australia, and wait for them to select you. So then you can apply for state nomination. So then Skill Select will invite you finally to apply for your visa. Queensland is open to all 3 lists, all occupations in the list, unless for people offshore. If people are offshore, they need to nominate an occupation from the Queensland Skilled Occupation list. We cannot apply directly to Queensland. We need to wait for them to select your expression of interest. And there's 4 pathways. There's a pathway for people outside of Australia. As I said, they need to nominate an occupation on the QSOL, the Queensland Skilled Occupation list. They must show they have proficient English. So remember, proficient is IELTS with a score of 7 in each component, and at least 3 years of work experience in that occupation post-graduation. So after they completed their diploma or bachelor, whatever. Now, if people are living in Queensland and working full-time in their occupations, they could also be considered for this nomination. Minimum 3 months for the visa 491, temporary. Minimum of 6 months for the visa 190. Minimum time spent working full-time in Queensland before being considered for nomination. Now, who normally meets this requirement? People who are in Queensland on a graduate visa, so people who finished their studies and jumped on to a graduate visa, people who are sponsored on a temporary work visa, and so on. but everyone needs to have proficient English. And people looking to be nominated for the 190 visa need to score at least 80 in the points test, not 65, but 80. People who cannot score 80 have only one option, which is to be nominated for the temporary visa 491. So again, 491 is a temporary visa that comes with conditions attached to it. Once that visa is approved to you, you're going to have to only live and work in regional areas. So that's better for the state. So they make it easier for that visa in the case of Queensland. Now, the 190 is a permanent visa, and the condition is that you can live anywhere in Queensland because Queensland's nominating you for the first 2 years. And after the 2 years, you can live wherever you want. So they make it harder to get nominated for that visa. If you go to university in Queensland, you could be nominated for one of these two visas, but you need to show that you have also a job offer after you graduate. So if you completed a bachelor degree or master degree, you not only have to graduate, but then you also show that you've been working and that you have an offer. So again, you need to finish your studies, jump onto a graduate visa, work in your occupation, which is a means, it's a way that Queensland's saying, okay, show to us that you have the skills required to find work in Queensland. Show to us that there is a place for you in the workforce and we will nominate you. If you complete a doctorate, a PhD, then you don't need a job offer. There's also what is called the small business owners stream. So if you are outside of Brisbane, but living in Queensland, in another region of Queensland, and you have a visa which allows you to work full time, so again, a graduate visa, you could be buying an existing business in Queensland or starting a business there, and you could look into getting nominated for that pathway. There's a lot of little requirements. The business cannot be certain types of businesses. It's really complicated. So make sure you talk to us if you're planning on buying a business in Queensland. Don't go crazy and buy a business just thinking I'll buy a business and I'll be nominated. It's not that simple. There's many more requirements. Victoria is the state whose capital is Melbourne. And to our surprise, this financial year, they opened to all occupations in all the 3 lists. They really had a close-in program for the past 2 years during the pandemic because they kept having lockdowns. They were badly affected by COVID, but now they're in a position where they really need workers across the board. So they are happy to nominate anyone in the list as long as they are living and working in regional Victoria, if they're looking for the 491 visa. Living offshore, if they have a health occupation, they'll be giving priority to those. Or living in Victoria and working in any occupation if they're looking for the 190 visa. Now, if you're not in Victoria, you cannot be in any other states of Australia, but you could be outside. So if you're living in Australia, if you want to be nominated by Victoria, you must be living in Victoria. If you are outside of Australia, obviously you won't be living there, but there are provisions for people outside to be nominated. However, they've made it very clear they'll prioritize health occupations. Again, this is another state where I can't prepare an application and lodge with the state and say, Victoria, please nominate my client. We need to submit an expression of interest, then a registration of interest with Victoria, and then they may select you for nomination. Then we have Canberra, the ACT. We have pretty much 4 pathways for nomination with Canberra. And Canberra is always choosing people every month. They do 2 or 3 invitation rounds. They're pretty active. You either, your occupation is on the critical skills list that they have. So again, you can Google ACT, which is the Australian Capital Territory abbreviation. Canberra is the capital of Australia. You can Google that critical skills list and you see there's a variety of occupations there. And you should be living and working in Canberra in your occupation for at least 20 hours a week. So if you're an international student, you're in Canberra and you get a job, a part-time job in your occupation, great, you may be able to meet this requirement. There's another pathway, which is you can nominate any occupation in the instrument in one of those 3 lists, but you are sponsored in Canberra in that occupation on 482 sponsorship visa for at least 3 months. Or you have bought or started a business in Canberra and you've been running that business for at least 3 months. Now, Canberra was the first state or territory last year to open for offshore candidates. Even before the borders reopened, they were already saying, if you're offshore, we want to have a look at your skills. Now, if you are offshore, Canberra will only nominate you if you have an occupation in the critical skills list and if you have at least 3 years of relevant experience. And this is all for the visa 491. For the visa 190, the periods of time increase. So if you can nominate an occupation in the critical skills list, you should be living and working in Canberra for the last 6 months. If you are sponsored in any occupation, in any list, you should be there for at least 6 months as well and running a business as well. Now, if you're offshore and you want nomination for the 190 visa, you need to have a job offer in Canberra in an occupation in the critical skills list. Again, not able to approach Canberra and say, this is my client, please nominate them. We need to actually register your details within what is called the Canberra Matrix, which is a mini skill select within the territory. And they will give you points for how long you've been living in Canberra, for how long you have studied there, worked there, if you invested any money there, and then they could invite you. So again, no guarantees, no certainties. None of the states and territories guarantees they will choose you. That's why we keep going back and saying employer visas are better, because you know, okay, I have a job, this company wants me, I've been assessed by a migration agent that I qualify for this visa. You're more in control, you're more in the know that you can actually get that visa. GSM, even though there's way more spaces, can still be a question mark. And the last state is South Australia. So South Australia has opened to the whole instrument, as we call it, the 3 lists, but they not necessarily have all the pathways available to all the occupations. So you really need to go to their website and find your occupation and see which one of these pathways are available. The pathways are recent graduates who studied for at least a year in South Australia and also have worked in their occupation in South Australia. People who graduate from university with incredible scores don't need to show they have worked. People who are working in South Australia. South Australia accepts part-time work, but each occupation has a minimum. Some occupations require work for 6 months, 3 months, others even for 2 years. So you've got to be careful. And long-term residents of South Australia, this is a new pathway. It's for people who have been living in South Australia for at least 5 years on student visas, sponsorship visas, graduate visas, and who are also working in South Australia, but in a job that is not related to their occupation. So for example, you are a doctor, you can obtain a skills assessment as a doctor. You've been living in South Australia and you have been working there for 12 months, but as a carer or as a medical administrator or as a restaurant manager, because you changed careers completely, this could be an option for you, and it's a new stream. Then we have highly skilled and talented people. So this is almost like a mini global talent visa, where we're going to have to show that you have won awards or that you worked for large companies that are multinational and have a presence in South Australia, or that you have very, very special technical skills in one of these sectors, and showing that you have proficient English and that you're earning a considerable salary of $80,000 at least. So that could be an option. But with all these streams, one very good thing about South Australia is that once my clients actually meet this criteria for one of these pathways, I can actually lodge a state nomination application for my clients and see if South Australia is going to say, yes, we want to nominate them, or no, which gives us a little bit more control, because I know that if they're going to nominate you, you will be invited by Skill Select, and I can actually apply and ask for an answer. When it comes to all the other states, except the Northern Territory, we can't do that anymore. We need to wait for them to select and invite you. South Australia, these 4 pathways, it's still the old system. I can approach them directly and apply. However, when we look at the highly skilled and talented stream, that's by invitation only, and offshore applicants also by invitation only. So you need to have minimum years of work experience, and that varies from occupation to occupation, and we need to wait for them to invite you. Okay, so this covers all that I can talk about GSM. I've been speaking for 1 hour and 20 minutes. I hope I haven't bored you. As you can see, there's a lot of requirements, lots of stages when it comes to a general skilled migration visa. And what, even though we are optimistic about the increasing numbers and the decrease in ranking for the points test, we had clients invited in August for the 189 visa with just 65 score in the points test. This is all very positive, but as you can see, it's a big question mark still. There's more people applying, expressing interest for these visas than there are places still. These places are not enough for everyone this year, which then creates a very long queue, and you may not be nominated because your expression of interest expires after 2 years. So if you are in Australia, we can help you get your skills assessment. We can do your expression of interest, but we will also create a plan B for you during our visa action plan consultation. We might say, okay, at the same time, we're putting this expression of interest. You should be looking for work in this occupation. Let's see if you find an employer to apply for an employer visa. They are still the best option. They happen quicker once you have a job offer. Now, if you are not in Australia, we will see if you don't want to come to Australia on a temporary visa, on a working holiday visa, on a student visa. So then you could do the same. Don't sit in your country waiting for an invitation. We will get your skills assessed. We will submit your expression of interest, but we'll try to bring you on a temporary visa if you qualify for one, to try and find work in your field. Now, if this is the situation, if you're looking at GSM, we offer the visa action plan. It is by Zoom. One of my agents will assess you, create a plan for you. But if you are in Australia watching us today live, or you're watching this as a recording, we also offer a free phone chats with our agents if you're looking at applying for a partner visa, or if you get a job offer, which I hope you all do if you're looking at migrating to Australia. We recommend you sign up for our newsletter. If you are watching us via a recording of this presentation on our YouTube channel, you can see this link in the description of this video. So sign up. We don't send what I call fluffy newsletters. We send newsletters with a lot of information that is crucial to people looking at migrating to Australia, people who are overseas, who are in Australia on a temporary visa, looking for a permanent visa. We send information such as the example. Thank you so much for watching this. If you watched a little bit, if you watched the whole thing, I hope this has been informative. We have, as I said, many more videos on our YouTube channel that you can watch and obtain lots of information. Have a look at our Instagram page, our website, blog posts. But if you want specific answers about your case, get in touch with us by email and we can organize either a free assessment or a visa action plan for you. Thanks for watching and hopefully see you in Australia.